May 7, 1942, Bataan Peninsula, Philippines. Lieutenant Hajime Tanaka crouched behind a shattered palm tree, his Type 99 Arisaka rifle gripped tight in both hands. The bolt felt familiar after years of service in Manchuria and China. Load one round, fire, pull back the bolt handle, eject the spent casing, push forward, load the next round, aim, fire again. This was the rhythm that had carried imperial forces across the Asian mainland, the rhythm that seemed unstoppable. 5 rounds in the internal magazine, fired one at a time, each requiring manual cycling of the bolt. Across the smoking jungle, American soldiers had just retreated from their positions, but they had left something behind, something that would change everything Tanaka had been told about American military capability. In the abandoned foxhole lay an M1 Garand rifle, its wooden stock scratched but intact, its mechanism still gleaming. Tanaka had heard reports from the front. Japanese soldiers claimed Americans were armed with machine guns, every single infantryman carrying automatic weapons. High Command had dismissed these reports as exaggeration, the panic of men facing unexpected resistance. But now Tanaka held the weapon in his own hands. What happened over the next 48 hours, as captured Garand rifles were transported to Japanese naval engineers at Yokosuka, would prove those battlefield reports had been absolutely correct. The semi-automatic rifle wasn't just incrementally better than the Arisaka. It represented a fundamental transformation in infantry combat that Japanese forces could not match. This wasn't merely a story of technological advantage, but of an empire's desperate attempt to copy what it could not counter. The foundation of Japanese confidence rested on decades of military tradition. The Type 99 Arisaka, adopted in 1939, represented the culmination of Japanese bolt-action rifle development. Accurate, out to 500 yards with iron sights, reliable in tropical humidity and mountain cold, simple enough for conscripts to maintain, the Type 99 embodied everything imperial military doctrine demanded of an infantry rifle. It fired the powerful 7.7mm by 58mm Arisaka cartridge, capable of penetrating substantial cover. The rifle's cock on close bolt action was mechanically strong, proven through decades of combat in Manchuria and China. Japanese military testing after the war would reveal that Arisaka actions were actually stronger than American Springfields, British Lee Enfields, and German Mausers in stress tests. In trained hands, the Type 99 had conquered vast territories across Asia. Japanese military doctrine emphasized disciplined fire from prepared positions. Infantry training stressed the spiritual dimension of warfare, the importance of Bushido, and the warrior's code. A skilled Japanese soldier could fire approximately 12 to 15 aimed rounds per minute from his Type 99, working the bolt with practiced efficiency. This seemed more than adequate when facing Chinese forces armed primarily with older Mauser bolt-action weapons. The Chinese Chiang Kai-shek rifles held 5 rounds and used similar bolt-action mechanisms. Japanese soldiers had learned to respect Chinese determination, but not Chinese firepower. When American forces entered major combat operations in the Pacific in December 1941, Japanese intelligence had prepared assessments of American equipment. These reports painted a picture of a nation rich in industrial resources but lacking in martial spirit. American infantry, the assessments claimed, relied too heavily on material superiority and too little on warrior discipline. The M1 Garand appeared in these reports as a semi-automatic rifle of technical interest, but not particular tactical concern. Japanese analysts noted its 8-round capacity and self-loading mechanism, but pointed out it was heavier than the Type 99 at approximately 9.5 pounds compared to 8.2 pounds. The general assessment concluded that while the M1 offered higher volume of fire, it sacrificed the accuracy and reliability inherent in simpler bolt-action mechanisms. More critically, Japanese military philosophy emphasized that superior spirit could overcome material disadvantage. This belief had proven true against Chinese forces. It would prove catastrophically false against American firepower. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Yet American forces had already been using the M1 Garand in combat since December 8, 1941, when Japanese forces invaded the Philippines the morning after Pearl Harbor. M1 rifles shipped between August and November 1941 had equipped the United States Army's Philippine Department and elite Philippine scouts. These soldiers used their Garands effectively enough that Japanese troops immediately reported facing machine gun fire in every engagement. The distinction between semi-automatic rifle fire and automatic machine gun fire seemed academic to soldiers being shot at. What mattered was that Americans could fire continuously without the pauses required for working a bolt. Japanese infantry advancing across open ground found themselves cut down by what seemed like endless streams of aimed fire. Individual American soldiers were putting out more rounds than entire Japanese squads. General Douglas MacArthur cabled Washington in February 1942, praising the rifle's performance even in the dust and dirt of foxhole fighting. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Fry, commanding the 3rd Battalion of the 57th Regiment Philippine Scouts, described the effect in terms that reveal the impact. "The firepower of a battalion armed with modern weapons is something," he wrote. "The Garand rifle is beyond my descriptive powers." Captured Japanese soldiers, interrogated after the fall of Bataan, asked repeatedly how America could afford to arm every soldier with a machine gun. "These weren't machine guns," American interrogators explained. "They were standard infantry rifles." The Japanese soldiers didn't believe it. Their experience on the receiving end of that firepower had convinced them they faced something far beyond ordinary small arms. By the time Japanese naval engineers captured M1 Garands in May 1942 after the fall of Bataan, the weapon had proven itself through 6 months of brutal jungle combat. The reality those engineers discovered shattered assumptions with brutal efficiency. The mathematics were undeniable. In a 2-minute engagement, a Japanese soldier with a Type 99 Arisaka might fire 24 to 30 aimed rounds, assuming perfect conditions and exceptional training. An American with an M1 Garand could fire 60 to 80 rounds in the same period. More critically, the Japanese soldier had to break his sight picture, work the bolt, reacquire his target, and fire. The American simply pulled the trigger 8 times in rapid succession, his aim barely disturbed by the rifle's modest recoil. The M1 Garand's semi-automatic operation relied on a gas-operated system. As a round fired, propellant gases were diverted through a port in the barrel into a cylinder below. This gas drove a piston that cycled the action, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a new round. The entire process took a fraction of a second. The rifle's action remained closed between shots, maintaining barrel-to-sight alignment. Accuracy did not suffer despite rapid fire. Testing at Springfield Armory demonstrated the M1 could maintain 4-minute of angle groups, meaning 4 inches of spread at 100 yards. Many production rifles performed significantly better. General George Patton, in a letter dated January 26, 1945, to Major General Levin Campbell, Jr., Chief of Ordnance, wrote words that would become legendary. "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised." This was not hyperbole. Patton understood the rifle had fundamentally changed infantry combat. A soldier armed with an M1 Garand possessed firepower equivalent to multiple riflemen with bolt-action weapons, without sacrificing accuracy, reliability, or effective range. Japanese engineers examining captured Garand rifles at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal understood immediately what they faced. The weapon represented everything their military establishment had failed to produce. The Imperial Japanese Navy had experimented with semi-automatic rifles in the early 1930s, testing rifles based on the Czechoslovakian ZH-29 design. The Japanese Army had developed several prototypes, including rifles influenced by John Pedersen's toggle-locked design. None had progressed beyond limited trials. When war with China erupted in 1937, all semi-automatic rifle programs were cancelled. Japan simply did not have the industrial capacity or manufacturing precision to produce complex semi-automatic rifles in meaningful numbers while simultaneously waging war on the Asian mainland. Resources had to be concentrated on proven designs that could be manufactured quickly by semi-skilled workers. The decision seemed rational in 1937. By 1942, facing American forces across the Pacific, that decision appeared catastrophically short-sighted. The captured M1 Garands were transported to Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in Tokyo Bay. Engineers there had access to machine tools, metallurgical expertise, and the authority to begin immediate testing. In early 1944, 10 captured M1 rifles were modified to chamber the 7.7mm by 58mm Arisaka cartridge. The cartridge had similar dimensions to the American .30-06 Springfield round, so the conversion seemed feasible. Initial testing revealed a fundamental problem. The M1 Garand fed from an 8-round en-bloc clip, a metal clip inserted directly into the rifle's action. When the last round fired, the clip automatically ejected with a distinctive metallic ping. The Japanese 7.7mm cartridge had slightly different rim dimensions than the .30-06. While the Garand could chamber and fire the Japanese ammunition, the en-bloc clip system would not feed reliably. Rounds jammed, clips failed to insert properly. The feeding mechanism, which worked perfectly with American ammunition, became unreliable with Japanese cartridges. Japanese engineers faced a choice. They could develop entirely new ammunition matching American specifications, requiring retooling factories and changing logistics systems across the entire military. Or they could redesign the rifle's magazine system to work with existing Japanese ammunition. They chose the latter. The result was the Type 4 rifle, Japan's direct copy of the American M1 Garand, but copy is perhaps too simple a word. The Type 4 represented reverse engineering under extreme pressure, attempting to replicate a weapon designed over 2 decades while Japan's industrial capacity crumbled under American bombing. Design work began in earnest in 1944. By then, American forces were driving toward the Philippines. The home islands themselves would soon be under threat. Japanese naval infantry, the Rikusentai, faced American Marines island after island. The firepower disparity was devastating. Every engagement proved the same tactical reality. Americans could generate overwhelming rifle fire from every position. Japanese infantry armed with bolt-action rifles could not suppress them effectively. The Type 4 rifle incorporated the M1 Garand's gas-operated system and a rotating bolt. The basic mechanism was nearly identical, but the feeding system changed completely. Instead of the 8-round en-bloc clip, the Type 4 used a 10-round fixed internal magazine. This magazine was charged with 2 5-round stripper clips, the same clips used with the Type 99 Arisaka. This meant Japanese soldiers could use existing ammunition and loading procedures. The magazine protruded slightly from the bottom of the receiver, making the rifle easy to distinguish from an M1 Garand. The rear sight was also different, using a tangent-style adjustable sight familiar to Japanese soldiers rather than the M1's aperture sight. The rifle retained the M1's safety mechanism in the trigger guard and used a nearly identical operating rod running beneath the barrel. Externally, the Type 4 strongly resembled the weapon it copied. Manufacturing shops were established at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal. Production was scheduled to begin in earnest in 1945, with hopes of producing thousands per month once the manufacturing process was perfected. The timeline was desperately ambitious. Japan needed these rifles immediately, but developing any new weapon requires time for testing, tooling, training workers, establishing supply chains for specialized components. By 1944, Japan no longer had time. American submarines had devastated merchant shipping, raw materials were increasingly scarce, skilled workers had been drafted, factories faced constant threat of bombing as American B-29s extended their reach across the Pacific. The industrial infrastructure required to mass-produce precision weapons was disintegrating. Production proceeded regardless. By August 1945, approximately 250 part sets had been manufactured. Slightly more than 100 complete rifles had been assembled. 20 of these rifles were discovered intact when Allied forces occupied Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in September 1945 after Japan's surrender. The rifles were examined by American ordnance experts, photographed, and most were eventually destroyed or taken as war trophies. The few surviving examples are among the rarest Japanese weapons of World War II. The Type 4 rifle represented Japan's acknowledgement that their enemy's technology was superior. This admission contradicted everything imperial propaganda had taught Japanese soldiers about Western decadence and Eastern martial superiority. If American rifles were fundamentally better than Japanese rifles, what did that imply about the rest of American military capability? The psychological impact extended beyond simple firepower calculations. Japanese military doctrine emphasized spirit, discipline, and willingness to sacrifice. These qualities had proven sufficient against Chinese forces and colonial European armies in Southeast Asia. Against American firepower, backed by American industrial capacity, spirit alone was insufficient. Individual Japanese soldiers were brave. Their training was rigorous. Their discipline was legendary. None of this mattered when they simply could not fire fast enough. The M1 Garand's technical specifications told only part of the story. The rifle fired the .30-06 Springfield cartridge, a powerful round that had served American forces since 1926. The cartridge propelled a 150-grain bullet at approximately 2,800 feet per second, delivering substantial energy at extended ranges. The round was powerful enough to penetrate light cover and remained effective beyond 500 yards. The rifle fed from an 8-round en-bloc clip, a system that had drawbacks but worked reliably in combat conditions. The en-bloc clip system increased the rifle's weight and complexity compared to detachable magazines, but it provided a flush-mount magazine that didn't protrude from the weapon. When the last round fired, the clip ejected automatically. This created the distinctive metallic ping that American soldiers would either celebrate or curse, depending on circumstance. Some feared this sound might alert enemies to an empty rifle. Combat veterans universally reported that battle noise made the ping inaudible beyond a few yards. German and Japanese soldiers later interviewed about the sound confirmed it was rarely noticed during actual combat. The rifle's reliability became legendary. Exposed to Philippine humidity, New Guinea rain, Pacific Island heat, and later Korean winter conditions, the M1 functioned with minimal maintenance. Field stripping required no tools. The operating rod and bolt could be removed for cleaning in minutes, then reassembled quickly even in darkness. Japanese observers examining captured rifles consistently noted this reliability with respect and frustration. They understood they faced a weapon that worked under conditions where more finicky designs failed. Japanese defensive doctrine relied heavily on prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire, and willingness to fight to the death. The Type 92 and Type 96 machine guns provided suppressive fire, while riflemen engaged targets with careful aimed shots. This doctrine worked reasonably well when facing opponents with similar equipment. Against American forces, the firepower imbalance proved devastating. American infantry squads, with each rifleman armed with a Garand, could generate rifle fire approaching that of Japanese machine gun teams. More critically, this firepower was distributed across the entire squad. Suppressing an American squad required suppressing 8 or 9 individually armed soldiers, each capable of sustained rapid fire. Japanese machine guns could be targeted and destroyed. American riflemen were everywhere. The Pacific Campaign from Guadalcanal onward provided Japanese forces extensive experience fighting American troops. From the Solomon Islands through New Guinea, from the Gilbert Islands to the Marshalls, Japanese infantry found themselves consistently outgunned by American riflemen. A captured Japanese intelligence report from mid-1943 noted that encounters with American infantry typically resulted in Japanese forces being unable to maneuver due to overwhelming rifle fire. The report recommended increased allocation of automatic weapons to compensate for American advantages in infantry firepower. But Japan could not produce automatic weapons in sufficient numbers. Resources were stretched across multiple priorities: aircraft production, naval construction, artillery manufacture, all competed for limited steel, skilled labor, and machine tools. Infantry rifles, even revolutionary semi-automatic infantry rifles, simply could not receive the priority they required. The Japanese military establishment recognized the problem and attempted solutions within their constraints. Beyond the Type 4 rifle, Japanese arsenals experimented with other designs. None reached production before war's end. The stark reality was that Japan had entered the war without an effective semi-automatic infantry rifle and never caught up. The reasons were complex, rooted in pre-war decisions, industrial limitations, and strategic priorities. But for the individual Japanese soldier facing American infantry, the reasons didn't matter. What mattered was that the enemy could fire 3 times as fast, could maintain continuous pressure, could win firefights through sheer volume of aimed fire. The impact extended beyond simple casualties. Japanese tactics evolved to emphasize night attacks, infiltration, and close combat, where American firepower advantages diminished. Banzai charges, the headlong bayonet assaults that terrified Chinese forces, became desperate attempts to close range before American fire became overwhelming. These charges rarely succeeded against prepared American positions. Marines and Army soldiers with M1 Garands could deliver devastating fire against charging infantry. The semi-automatic action meant no pauses, no gaps in fire as soldiers worked bolts, just continuous aimed shooting until the assault collapsed. At Guadalcanal in August 1942, Japanese forces launched repeated night attacks against Marine positions. Marines armed with M1 Garands broke up these attacks with rifle fire alone. The volume of fire was so intense that Japanese commanders initially believed they faced primarily machine gun positions. After-action reports revealed that standard rifle fire from Garands had done most of the damage. At Tarawa in November 1943, Marines assaulting fortified positions faced some of the most intense defensive fire of the Pacific War. Yet Marine riflemen with Garands could suppress Japanese positions effectively. The ability to fire 8 aimed shots without working a bolt meant Marines could keep Japanese defenders pinned while other Marines advanced. The semi-automatic rifle changed offensive tactics as much as defensive. At Saipan in June and July 1944, Japanese forces fought with fanatical determination. Defensive positions were expertly constructed, camouflaged, and mutually supporting. Yet American infantry prevailed through firepower. Every rifleman carried a weapon that could deliver sustained fire. Japanese defenders could not maintain aimed return fire because incoming rounds were too numerous, too continuous. At Peleliu in September 1944, Marines faced perhaps the most sophisticated Japanese defenses of the war. Fortified caves, interconnected tunnels, pre-registered artillery. The battle became a brutal contest of attrition. American casualties were severe, but American firepower eventually prevailed. Marines could suppress cave entrances with rifle fire, could provide covering fire for flamethrower teams, and could maintain pressure that Japanese forces armed with bolt-action rifles could not match. The Garand didn't win these battles alone. Artillery, naval gunfire, air support, logistics all contributed. But at the squad level, where soldiers actually fought and died, the M1 Garand provided a clear advantage. Japanese infantry simply could not generate equivalent firepower with their Type 99 Arisakas, no matter how skilled or determined they were. Statistical analysis conducted after the war, examining after-action reports and casualty data, revealed patterns. American infantry squads inflicted casualties at rates significantly higher than expected based on numerical parity. While many factors contributed, including artillery and air superiority, the consistent advantage in infantry firefights pointed clearly to the M1 Garand's role. American infantrymen won engagements even when outnumbered, provided they had reasonable cover and adequate ammunition. The captured M1 Garands that Japanese engineers examined represented not just superior technology, but superior industrial planning. America had recognized the value of semi-automatic rifles in the 1920s. John Cantius Garand had begun work on his design in 1919, 2 decades before the Pacific War began. By the time war started, American factories were already producing thousands of Garands monthly. By 1944, production exceeded 4,000 rifles daily. Japan's attempt to copy the Garand came far too late. Even if the Type 4 had entered full production in 1945, Japan lacked the industrial capacity to produce enough rifles to make a difference. American forces were already preparing for the invasion of the home islands. The Manhattan Project was nearing completion. Japan's window for fielding competitive small arms had closed years earlier. The Type 4 rifle stands as testament to what might have been if Japan had pursued semi-automatic rifle development earlier, with greater resources, under less pressure. The rifle's design was sound. It incorporated the best features of the M1 Garand while adapting the magazine system for Japanese ammunition and production methods. With proper development time and manufacturing capacity, the Type 4 could have been an effective weapon. But weapons development requires time and resources. Japan had neither by 1944. The empire's industrial base was contracting under American pressure. Factories were being bombed. Shipping was interrupted. Raw materials were scarce. The Type 4 program proceeded under impossible conditions, achieving modest success considering the circumstances, but ultimately producing too few rifles too late to matter. When Allied forces discovered the assembled Type 4 rifles at Yokosuka in September 1945, American ordnance experts examined them with professional interest. The rifles demonstrated competent engineering. The gas system worked. The bolt locked properly. The magazine fed reliably. But the build quality was rough compared to American-manufactured Garands. Tool marks were visible. Finish work was minimal. The rifles represented Japan's declining industrial capacity as clearly as any weapon produced in the war's final year. 20 rifles were taken for study. Some were sent to Aberdeen Proving Ground for testing. Others became war trophies. The vast majority of Type 4 parts and partially assembled rifles were destroyed. Today, fewer than a dozen confirmed Type 4 rifles exist in collections worldwide. They are among the rarest Japanese military weapons, worth substantial sums to collectors who appreciate their historical significance. The story of Japanese officers testing captured Garands, then admitting those rifles fired 3 times faster than Arisakas, reveals more than simple firepower calculations. The admission revealed the collapse of an ideological foundation. Japanese military training emphasized that spirit, discipline, and warrior tradition could overcome material disadvantages. When confronted with incontrovertible evidence that American rifles were fundamentally superior, that ideology crumbled. Individual courage could not compensate for firing 3 rounds, while the enemy fired 8. The captured Garand rifles represented physical proof that American industrial capability exceeded Japanese assumptions. These weren't experimental prototypes or specialized weapons issued to elite units. These were standard infantry rifles, carried by every American soldier. The implications were staggering. If America could afford to equip millions of soldiers with semi-automatic rifles, what other technological advantages did American forces possess? Japanese intelligence assessments after examining captured Garands became increasingly pessimistic through 1943 and 1944. Reports acknowledged American firepower superiority explicitly. Recommendations emphasized night attacks, close-quarters combat, and defensive positions that minimized American advantages. But recommendations could not change the fundamental reality that Japanese infantry were outgunned in nearly every engagement. The psychological impact on Japanese soldiers manifested in multiple ways. Some units became reluctant to engage American infantry in open combat, preferring ambushes and defensive positions. Others doubled down on banzai charges, attempting to close distance before American firepower became overwhelming. Neither approach solved the underlying problem. American rifles fired faster, and that advantage proved decisive across thousands of engagements. Lieutenant Tanaka, the officer who first examined a captured Garand at Bataan, survived the war. In post-war interviews conducted by American military historians, he described the moment he test-fired the captured rifle. The rate of fire shocked him, he admitted. He had fired Arisaka rifles for years, achieving proficiency that earned commendations. Yet this American rifle, even in his untrained hands, allowed him to fire faster than he could with his own weapon. The realization was immediate and disturbing. If an average American soldier, with average training, possessed this weapon, then Japanese infantry faced insurmountable disadvantage. Tanaka's report traveled up the chain of command. Similar reports from other officers examining captured Garands corroborated his findings. By mid-1942, Japanese high command understood they faced a critical problem with no immediate solution. The M1 Garand's development history contrasted sharply with Japan's experience. John Cantius Garand, born January 1, 1888 in St. Remy, Quebec, moved to the United States with his family in 1899. He began working at Springfield Armory on November 4, 1919, devoting nearly 2 decades to perfecting his semi-automatic rifle design. Early prototypes used different operating systems and calibers. The United States Army originally favored a .276 caliber cartridge, offering better ballistics than .30-06, but General Douglas MacArthur, then Army Chief of Staff, insisted on retaining .30-06 to utilize existing ammunition stocks and maintain compatibility with machine guns. This decision, made in 1932, delayed adoption but ultimately proved sound. Garand continued refining his design through the early 1930s. The rifle underwent extensive testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground and Springfield Armory. Problems were identified and corrected methodically. The gas system was simplified from an early gas trap design to a simpler gas port system. The trigger mechanism was refined for reliability and consistent pull weight. The stock design was improved for better ergonomics and durability. On January 9, 1936, the rifle was officially adopted as the United States Rifle Caliber 30 M1. Initial production was slow, with only a few thousand rifles. Manufactured in 1937 and 1938, production accelerated as war loomed. By January 1941, Springfield Armory was producing 600 rifles daily. Winchester Repeating Arms joined production in December 1940. By 1944, combined production exceeded 4,000 rifles daily. This production achievement represented American industrial capacity at its peak. The M1 Garand required precision manufacturing. Tolerances were tight. The gas system demanded careful machining. The operating rod had to be manufactured to exact specifications, or the rifle would malfunction. Yet American factories produced these complex weapons at rates that staggered observers from other nations. Japanese industrial planners examining captured production data after the war expressed disbelief at American output figures. Japan's entire firearms industry, working at maximum capacity, could not match what Springfield Armory alone produced. When Winchester's production was added, the disparity became overwhelming. America outproduced Japan in rifles by margins that made competition impossible. The logistics of producing 4 million M1 Garands involved coordination across dozens of industries. Steel came from mills in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Walnut for stocks came from carefully selected trees in Missouri, California, and Appalachia. The wood had to be properly seasoned, cut to specification, and shaped by skilled workers. Machine tools came from manufacturers across New England and the Midwest. Each rifle contained approximately 54 major components and hundreds of smaller parts. Every component met precise specifications. Interchangeability was critical. A bolt from one rifle had to function in any other rifle. An operating rod manufactured in 1942 had to work in a rifle assembled in 1944. This level of standardization required industrial discipline that Japan struggled to achieve even in peacetime. By mid-1943, the United States Army was equipping entire divisions with M1 Garands. During World War II, from 1937 through 1945, approximately 4,400,000 M1 rifles were manufactured. Springfield Armory in Massachusetts produced 3,527,000 rifles. Winchester Repeating Arms in Connecticut manufactured 514,000. This production meant that by D-Day in June 1944, virtually every American rifleman in Europe and the Pacific carried an M1 Garand. This represented an unprecedented achievement. An entire military force numbering in the millions armed with semi-automatic rifles, while opponents still carried bolt-action weapons. No other nation accomplished this. The Soviet Union produced millions of semi-automatic rifles, but never achieved universal issues. German semi-automatic rifle production remained limited. Japan never came close. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The M1 Garand's impact on Japanese tactical thinking became apparent through captured documents and prisoner interrogations. Japanese field manuals from 1943 onward specifically addressed American firepower superiority. Recommendations included increased use of grenades to compensate for rifle fire disadvantage, emphasis on night operations when American fire discipline was harder to maintain, and construction of fortified positions that limited exposure to rifle fire. These adaptations helped somewhat, but could not overcome the fundamental imbalance. Japanese infantry still had to advance, still had to defend positions, still had to engage American forces. In each engagement, the firepower disparity influenced outcomes. At Iwo Jima in February and March 1945, Japanese forces constructed perhaps the most sophisticated defensive network of the Pacific War. 22,000 defenders occupied 11 square miles of volcanic rock, riddled with tunnels, bunkers, and fortified positions. Japanese planners knew they could not defeat the American invasion, but hoped to inflict such casualties that American public opinion would turn against the war. The battle became a brutal contest of attrition. Marines suffered 26,000 casualties, including nearly 7,000 killed. Yet Marine infantry prevailed through firepower and determination. M1 Garands proved essential in close-quarters fighting. Marines could suppress cave entrances with rifle fire, could provide covering fire for flamethrower teams and demolition charges, could maintain pressure that forced Japanese defenders into impossible choices: emerge to fight and be shot immediately, or remain hidden and be destroyed by explosives. At Okinawa, from April through June 1945, the pattern repeated. Japanese forces fought with desperate courage. Defensive positions were expertly prepared. Artillery was well registered. Yet American infantry firepower eventually ground down Japanese resistance. Army and Marine riflemen armed with Garands could deliver sustained fire that Japanese forces could not match. The human cost of the firepower imbalance appeared in casualty statistics. Japanese combat deaths at Okinawa exceeded 94,000. American combat deaths totaled approximately 12,000. While artillery, naval gunfire, and air support contributed heavily to this disparity, small unit action reports consistently showed American infantry inflicting disproportionate casualties in firefights. The rifle each soldier carried made a measurable difference. Japanese casualties from rifle fire were significant throughout the campaign. The M1 Garand deserved substantial credit for American tactical success at the squad level. The firepower advantage translated into lives saved. American soldiers could win firefights while taking fewer casualties because they could suppress enemy positions more effectively. Japanese attempts to compensate through superior tactics worked only partially. Eventually, the sheer volume of aimed fire from American infantry found targets, suppressed defensive positions, and enabled American maneuver elements to close with and destroy Japanese positions. The mathematics remained constant throughout the Pacific War. In the time required for a Japanese soldier to fire 3 carefully aimed shots from his Type 99 Arisaka, an American soldier with his M1 Garand could fire 8 to 9 rounds. When both soldiers were equally trained and skilled, the American would hit 2 to 3 times as many targets. In squad-level engagements, this difference became overwhelming. The M1 Garand gave American infantry numerical superiority in firepower, even when Japanese forces outnumbered them in actual soldiers. The Type 99 Arisaka was not a poor rifle by bolt-action standards. It was accurate, reliable, and strongly built. Japanese soldiers who survived the war and later had opportunities to fire both rifles acknowledged the Arisaka's qualities, but they universally admitted the Garand was superior. The semi-automatic action provided an advantage that training and skill could not overcome. One veteran interviewed in 1952 stated it plainly. "We were brave," he said. "We were disciplined, we were trained, but we could not fire fast enough." The admission was simple and devastating. Japanese military tradition emphasized qualities that mattered deeply: courage, discipline, training, willingness to sacrifice. These qualities had proven sufficient against Chinese forces and colonial European armies in Southeast Asia. Against American firepower backed by American industrial capacity, these qualities alone were insufficient. Superior equipment in skilled hands made profound difference in battle outcomes. The Type 4 rifle program represented Japan's acknowledgement of this reality, but acknowledgement came too late. By the time Japanese engineers completed their copy of the Garand, Japan's industrial capacity was collapsing. American submarines had devastated merchant shipping by 1944. Raw materials that once flowed freely to Japanese factories now arrived sporadically, if at all. Steel production declined sharply. Aluminum became scarce. Copper was diverted entirely to aircraft and electronics. The human toll was equally severe. Skilled workers had been drafted into military service. Factories operated with increasingly inexperienced workers, many of them women, children, and elderly men, pressed into service as the war consumed Japan's youth. Training these workers to produce precision weapons became progressively harder as experienced supervisors disappeared into the military. American bombing compounded every problem. B-29 raids struck Japanese cities with increasing frequency and intensity through 1945. Factories were destroyed. Transportation networks were disrupted. Workers lost their homes and families. Industrial output collapsed across all sectors. In this environment, producing complex semi-automatic rifles at scale was impossible. The Type 4 program continued regardless, driven by desperate hope that somehow these rifles might make a difference. Engineers worked through air raids. Factory workers assembled rifles while buildings shook from nearby explosions. The 250 parts sets and 100 complete rifles manufactured by August 1945 represented remarkable achievement under impossible conditions. But remarkable achievement was insufficient. Japan needed hundreds of thousands of semi-automatic rifles, needed them years earlier, needed the industrial infrastructure to produce them at scale. The Type 4 program demonstrated technical competence but strategic failure. Japan had recognized the need for semi-automatic rifles too late, attempted to copy rather than innovate, and lacked the resources to implement even successful copying. When American forces occupied Japan in September 1945, ordnance teams catalogued Japanese weapons production facilities. The reports painted a picture of industrial devastation. Factories were bombed out shells. Machine tools were destroyed or obsolete. Supply chains had collapsed. The Type 4 rifles found at Yokosuka represented the final gasp of Japan's small arms industry. American ordnance officers examining the Type 4 rifles produced mixed assessments. The design was competent, showing clear understanding of the M1 Garand's operating principles. The decision to use a 10-round fixed magazine rather than copying the N-block clip system made sense given Japanese ammunition specifications. The manufacturing quality was poor, reflecting Japan's declining industrial capability, but the rifles functioned adequately. One American report noted that if Japan had developed this rifle in 1935 instead of 1944, the Pacific War might have unfolded differently. Japanese infantry, armed with semi-automatic rifles from the war's beginning, would have been far more formidable opponents. American casualties would likely have been higher. Battles that American forces won through firepower superiority might have been closer contests. But history admits no counterfactuals. Japan did not develop semi-automatic rifles early. When Japanese engineers finally produced a working design, circumstances had rendered it irrelevant. The Type 4 rifle became a historical footnote, a curiosity for collectors, a reminder of what might have been under different conditions. The broader lesson transcended specific weapons. Japan entered the Pacific War believing that warrior spirit and tactical skill could overcome material disadvantage. This belief had some basis in experience. Japanese forces had defeated larger Chinese armies through superior training and leadership. Japanese pilots had proven highly effective despite flying aircraft that were sometimes technically inferior to opponents. But there are limits to what spirit and skill can overcome. When the material disadvantage becomes too great, when the technological gap becomes too wide, superior equipment prevails. The M1 Garand represented such a gap. No amount of training could make a bolt-action rifle fire as fast as a semi-automatic. No amount of courage could compensate for being outgunned in every firefight. Japanese military theorists studying their defeats in the post-war period consistently identified the firepower disparity as critical. Former officers who had commanded infantry units described the helplessness of facing American attacks. Japanese soldiers would fire, work the bolt, acquire the target again, fire perhaps 12 to 15 rounds per minute from trained soldiers. But each American was firing 30 to 40 rounds per minute, hitting their targets. Japanese infantry could not suppress them effectively. Every time Japanese soldiers raised their heads to fire, multiple rounds came back immediately. The weight of fire was overwhelming. One former company commander described an engagement in New Guinea where his unit, occupying prepared positions with good fields of fire, was forced to retreat by American infantry assault. "We could not stop them," he recalled. "Every time we fired, 10 shots came back. Our men could not aim properly under such pressure." The psychological impact extended beyond individual engagements. Japanese soldiers learned to fear American firepower. Units that had fought bravely against Chinese forces became hesitant when facing Americans. The knowledge that the enemy could fire 3 times as fast sapped morale as effectively as actual casualties. Soldiers who believed their weapons were inferior to enemy weapons questioned whether their cause could succeed. This psychological dimension of weapons technology often receives less attention than it deserves. Soldiers who trust their equipment fight with greater confidence. Soldiers who know their weapons are inferior fight with diminished morale. American soldiers carrying M1 Garands trusted their rifles. They knew they possessed firepower advantage. This confidence translated into aggressive tactics and willingness to engage. Japanese soldiers carrying Type 99 Arisakas knew they were outgunned. Intelligence reports, battlefield experience, and captured American rifles all confirmed the firepower gap. This knowledge made defensive tactics more appealing, made night attacks seem necessary, made banzai charges appear as desperate attempts to overcome disadvantage rather than expressions of warrior spirit. The M1 Garand's influence extended beyond World War II into the post-war period. The rifle served American forces through the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. When North Korean forces invaded South Korea in June 1950, American units still carried Garands as standard infantry weapons. The rifle proved equally effective against North Korean and Chinese forces as it had against Japanese forces. Chinese infantry in Korea were armed primarily with Soviet-designed bolt-action rifles and some semi-automatic weapons. The firepower dynamics resembled the Pacific War. American riflemen with Garands could deliver sustained fire that Chinese forces struggled to match. At the Pusan perimeter in August and September 1950, American defensive positions held against numerically superior forces, largely through firepower superiority. At Chosin Reservoir in November and December 1950, Marines surrounded by Chinese forces fought their way out through devastating firepower. M1 Garands proved reliable in extreme cold that disabled other weapons. The rifle's robust gas system continued functioning in temperatures that froze less hardy designs. Marines who survived Chosin spoke reverently about their Garands, rifles that kept firing when everything else failed. The M1 Garand was not officially replaced as a standard service rifle until the M14 was adopted in 1957. The M14 was essentially an improved Garand with select fire capability and a 20-round detachable box magazine. It retained John Garand's basic gas operating system and rotating bolt. Even when the M14 gave way to the M16 in the 1960s, Garand's fundamental design principles influenced American military firearms. International adoption of the Garand validated its effectiveness. Over 30 nations purchased or received American surplus rifles after World War II. Japan itself, rearming in the 1950s under American guidance, received thousands of M1 Garands. Former Japanese soldiers trained on the weapons they had once faced in combat. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. South Korea, Taiwan, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Iran, Denmark, and many others armed their militaries with Garands in the 1950s and 60s. Some remained in service into the 1980s. The rifle's longevity testified to its effectiveness and robust design. A weapon designed in the 1920s remained viable in the Cold War era, a remarkable achievement in rapidly evolving weapons technology. The story of Japanese officers testing captured Garands ultimately represents the collision between ideology and reality. Japanese military doctrine emphasized that Bushido, the warrior code, could overcome material disadvantage. When confronted with physical evidence that American rifles fired 3 times faster than Arisakas, that ideology shattered against hard facts. Spirit and courage mattered, but not enough. The Type 4 rifle program represented Japan's attempt to copy what it could not counter. But even successful copying came too late. The rifles produced achieved technical adequacy, but strategic irrelevance. 100 rifles could not change the course of a war involving millions of soldiers. The window for fielding competitive small arms had closed years before Japanese engineers completed their work. The mathematics remained undeniable throughout the Pacific War. 3 shots from an Arisaka versus 8 from a Garand. 15 aimed rounds per minute versus 40. 1 Japanese rifleman versus 1 American rifleman meant a firepower ratio of 1-3. No tactical doctrine could overcome that disparity at scale. Individual engagements might be won through superior positions or tactics, but across thousands of engagements, the firepower advantage proved decisive. American industrial foresight, beginning with Garand's work in the 1920s and culminating in mass production by 1943, provided American forces with clear technological superiority. Japanese attempts to match this capability failed due to late recognition of the problem, insufficient industrial capacity, and wartime pressures that made weapons development nearly impossible. The contrast illustrated why America won the Pacific War. Not because American soldiers were braver than Japanese soldiers. They weren't. Not because American tactics were superior. Japanese defensive tactics were often excellent. America won because American industry could equip every soldier with weapons that multiplied their combat effectiveness. The M1 Garand exemplified this approach. Give average soldiers superior tools, and they become formidable. Give them tools 3 times more effective than enemy weapons, and they become nearly unstoppable. General Patton's assessment that the M1 rifle was the greatest battle implement ever devised proved accurate in the Pacific as well as Europe. The rifle changed what was possible in infantry combat. It demonstrated that technology could multiply effectiveness more than training alone ever could. It proved that industrial capacity translated directly into battlefield success. The distinctive sound of an M1 Garand firing became synonymous with American victory across the Pacific. Japanese soldiers learned to recognize and fear that sound. The continuous crack of semi-automatic fire, the absence of pauses for working bolts, the overwhelming volume of incoming rounds, these became harbingers of defeat. Japanese forces learned through painful experience that they could not win firefights against American infantry armed with Garands. The legacy extends beyond mere firepower statistics. The M1 Garand established principles that guided military rifle development for decades. Semi-automatic operation became standard. Gas-operated actions became preferred. The concept of giving every infantryman substantial individual firepower, rather than concentrating automatic weapons in specialist roles, became accepted doctrine. Modern military thinking about infantry weapons traces directly to lessons learned from the M1 Garand's combat performance. For Japanese officers who tested captured Garands and admitted those rifles fired 3 times faster than Arisakas, the moment represented profound realization. Everything they had been taught about American military inferiority was false. American industry was not producing shoddy equipment quickly. American industry was producing superior equipment at unprecedented scale. American soldiers were not poorly trained conscripts. American soldiers were adequately trained personnel, equipped with weapons that multiplied their effectiveness. The admission that American rifles were superior contradicted years of propaganda about Western decadence and Eastern martial superiority. It forced acknowledgement that Japan faced an opponent with overwhelming material advantages. It implied that perhaps the war itself was unwinnable, that Japan had challenged a power whose industrial capacity could not be matched. These were dangerous thoughts in militaristic Japan, but they were increasingly unavoidable as the war progressed. The Type 4 rifle stands as physical evidence of this realization. The weapon exists because Japanese officers understood their soldiers were outgunned. The program proceeded because military necessity demanded some response to American firepower superiority. The limited production reflects Japan's inability to implement solutions, even when problems were clearly understood. The handful of surviving rifles remind us that recognizing a problem and solving it are very different challenges. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.